All right, I'm super happy that we're gonna jump into the reading number 2 of the Phaedo on the immortality of the soul. Is there a soul? If there is, how could we know through reason as well as through faith? If it can be proven to be true, then can we prove that it's finite or is it immortal? If what about what's its nature? These are all questions that come up on the last day of Socrates' life, as he's waiting to drink the hemlock that has been demanded that he drink to eliminate him as a pesky problem maker in ancient Athens, who was disproving or proving that those who profess to have the greatest knowledge and wisdom actually were the biggest asses who didn't know anything. This caused problems. So, oh, here I got another person coming on here. Last week, we were introduced to some ideas. Brandy volunteered to kindly do a bit of a recap to sort of get those of us who might have forgotten some of the lines of argumentation, those who are just jumping on to get up to speed with where we're about to jump in on page number 18, I believe. So, Brandy, it's all yours. What should we think about?
Well, okay, so the setup obviously is for Socrates' friends visiting him, and he kind of sets them up by encouraging, was it Evenus? I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, but basically to follow me to death, because the true philosopher is constantly seeking towards death and preparing towards death. So that kind of throws them through a loop, and they're like, okay, well, why, if suicide's not good, then why should we want to die, basically? And Socrates defines death as the separation of the body from the soul. And so the question is, if we agree that they're separate, then how do we know that the body, that the soul doesn't die along with the body? So the first kind of hypothesis that he brings up is that of the opposites, and how like the opposites, things that are opposite, like being asleep and being awake, and the processes in between make it like this cycle. So that if if one is to be asleep, then you have to be awake. But if we stayed asleep all the time, then in a linear argument, then basically everything would end. So he talks about the souls of the dead coming from the living, and so that's one of the hypotheses. What else? And then the second one that we covered was about learning as recollection, and he implies or hypothesizes that that there is some knowledge of the soul before birth that must exist, because if we can question about something like equality or justice without having actually experienced true justice or true equality, there is some evidence of some prior knowledge of what that thing is, even though we're only comparing it to it. So I'm a little, that argument confuses me a little bit, but that's my best foot forward on that.
That's cool. No, that was efficient, Brandy. That was efficient. Does anybody have anything that they would add to that, or are we satisfied?
That was a good summary.
Thank you.
Cool.
I mean, you touched on just about everything.
I would just throw in one little paradox that entered my mind. When he, based on his the ground rules he lays out, the observations he lays out, where he says, he observes that opposites tend to come from opposites. So like if you're slower, it means you were once faster. If you were shorter, it means you were once taller. If you were better, it means the better comes from the worse, right? And so he first lays out this idea that the origin of an opposite is from its opposite. But then earlier on, didn't he say something to the effect that when dealing with qualities like virtue or courage, it can't be caused by its vice, its opposite? That courage done for the purpose of a vice cannot be said to be true courage, because if it's done for fear, then fear can't cause courage, right? He also threw that out there too, before he brought up this other line of thinking. So does that contradict what he was saying about opposites coming from opposites? or that, that evil must be caused, but must find its origins in good, or good must find its origins in evil. If we extend this idea to that other domain.
That's a good complication. Yeah, I haven't thought about that.
Fun little paradoxes, yeah. Fun little.
Well,
But anyway, that's just something to hold in the back of the mind. But we're now at the point where if to be awake meant that we came from being asleep, and to be alive meant that we came from death, if we're continuing on this hypothesis, let's see.
There's just one little interjection I'll make, that you cannot define something as good unless you know its opposite, or just by itself you would not know it's good if that was the universal quality. So the evil as an opposite allows a comparison which allows us to make judgments, and that works on both ways. That's just my little thought on that subject.
Yeah, knowledge of good can only be understood if you have a knowledge of its absence. Yeah, that's true. Good idea. Good point.
Would I be wrong in suggesting that all of this mirrors certain Hermetic ideas? Principle of duality, for example?
yes.
So as Brandy was saying, if death is defined as the liberation of the soul from the body, and thus if the philosopher is truly a lover of truth in its pure sense, then in that case the soul should finally be allowed to come into communion with an uncontaminated, pure experience of truth, of wisdom, of justice, of goodness, of all these things that a philosopher in the course of their material lives are always pursuing. And if that's the case, then that demands that we prove that there is immortality, that there is a soul that is beyond the body, which comes to know the truth, like these perfections. And so, like Brandy was saying, well, the idea of equality then is an interesting idea, because when we judge something as more or less equal to something else, we must have a standard inside of our soul that we're comparing these things against, of equality in its perfect sense. But we've never experienced equality because we're material beings who haven't experienced anything perfect. And same thing for justice or any of the pure freedom, any of the things, so that we can judge more or less free something that's more or less free, more or less just, more or less equal. So that idea, well, where did that come from? That knowledge of equality in its pure sense. We didn't learn it, so must it not have been there already before we were even born? Good demonstration that something pre-exists our material selves. But is that finite itself? Will it die away, or will it go on forever? We haven't proven that yet. So let's see where he goes with that.
Yeah, maybe a short way to say that what you explained in the last minute is that light is not the absence of darkness, but it's the presence of light.
That's good. But then what is darkness? Is it the absence of light, or is there a power of darkness?
Well, I would say that darkness is the phenomenal reality and light is the timeless reality. So here, I think that we have precisely something that is experienced in one domain, and what is in the lower domain cannot bring out what is in the upper domain. You only have either, you have to go through a kind of realization of the upper domain. And as long as you're in the lower domain, you can compare different grades of darkness, I would say, but it's not really light. You would need to come through a true experience of light, and there it's not comparison, or when we said that courage cannot come from fear, we can have a lesser fear on the lower domain. So someone who is less fearful or less afraid would be capable of a behavior that would be perceived in the time dimension as being less fearful, but it's not courage by itself. Okay, the true courage is a realization in the timeless domain.
Well, I'll just add to that, although I'm not entirely sure I understood, Quan, but on the question of the higher domain where true light is to be found, which I will just temporarily contrast with the physical light that we can see, which dispels darkness. Later on in the discussion, Socrates describes that there are things, Quan calls them upper domain, I think he calls them higher dimensions, or science is aware of higher dimensions, which can only be seen with the eye of the mind looking inward. They cannot be seen with the physical eyes. He goes on at least I think so in the ensuing discussion.
Yep.
So this is just, I mean, adding some more wrinkles to what you were saying.
Yeah.
But in this domain, how would you know if there was no darkness to compare it with? How would you know that? And if you only experienced light, could you know that there was something that is called darkness? If it was only light all the time in this domain, you know.
But you already are in the human body, so you already experience the phenomenal reality. And what happened in your life is that at a certain moment you will realize the upper domain, and that upper domain is precisely the goal of education. Okay, I know that I repeated that many times, but educare means to bring forth what is within, because you have to distinguish what is learning, or I would say conditioning, meaning the experiences that you went through in the phenomenal world, and that those are in the physical memories of the brain. But at a certain moment of your life, and it depends on what kind of life you have, you would experience that upper domain, meaning you would, because of an interaction, because you met someone, because of certain experience, you would see the form that were already there, and that is what I call the uplifting to the upper domain. And here is no longer comparisons of different grades in the phenomenal reality. It's something more stable, being instead of becoming, if you want.
Yes, that part I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, because in becoming, you only have different grades of a certain stuff that you can compare. For example, if you're less afraid, you would be considered relatively courageous to the one who is more afraid, but it's not courage by itself.
I think two ideas are getting mixed at the moment. So I would suggest maybe leave this for now and see what Socrates himself says, and then we can come back to this point.
Sounds good. So who wants to be today's Socrates?
I can be. I may not last more than an hour. I also have to get up tomorrow morning, but I could volunteer if nobody else is ready.
All right, first come, first serve. Okay, so you're Socrates. Who would like to be? Who are the other characters right now? We got.
I was Siebes last week. I'm quite happy to follow on with that.
Okay,
I haven't looked ahead to see whether he says anything though.
So Paul, you're going to keep being Siebes or Siebes. Let's go. Quan, Siebes or Siebes? Siebes, right? Who wants to be Siebes?
Huh? Socrates, Siebes.
Right. And who wants to be Simmias, the buddy of Siebes? Vince, you want to be, or how's your eyesight?
I'll be Simmias. I'll try.
Simmias? Okay, good. That should be it for now. And then when other people come in, we'll find speakers accordingly. So let's maybe go back to, we're at the bottom of 17, I believe. So I guess
here, let's make it a little bit bigger, just one notch.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, 1 second.
Yeah, that's good. I can read it from a distance.
Cool.
Yeah, you and me both, Paul.
Well, I'm trying to sit back and move my fan away. It's 9 o'clock in the morning here in Manila, and it's stinking hot and humid. So I've got to have the fan on, and I don't want it to intrude too much on the audio.
So far, so good. It's sounding pretty passive. So let's go from well, in any event. I guess let's assume it's Siebes speaking here.
Okay. Well, in any event, we must have recognized from sense perceptions that all perceptible equals are striving towards what equal is and are deficient with respect to it. Or how would we express this?
I think that was Socrates speaking.
That was totally
Yeah,
Socrates. Yeah, that was clearly Socrates.
Yeah, sorry.
All right. So now,
It
Simeon,
doesn't
Paul
have
say
names
in
here,
that
so
way.
in that way.
Okay, Socrates.
Then, before we began to see and hear and use the other senses, I presume we must have acquired knowledge of what the equal itself is, if we are to refer the equals perceived through the senses to that equal, and recognize that everything of this sort endeavors to be like that, but is inferior to it.
That must follow from what we said before, Socrates.
Didn't we see and hear and use the other senses as soon as we were born?
Certainly.
Then we must have acquired the knowledge of the equal before we acquired the senses. Is that what we are saying?
Yes.
So apparently, we must have acquired this knowledge before we were born.
So it seems.
Therefore, if we were born possessing this knowledge, having acquired it before birth, then is it not the case that before we were born and at birth, we knew not only the equal and the more and the less, but everything of that sort too? Indeed, this argument is no more concerned with the equal than with beauty itself, good itself, justice, holiness, and as I say, everything to which we apply the term what it is, both in the inquiries when we ask questions and in the responses when we answer them, in which case we must have acquired the knowledge of all these before birth.
That is it.
And if after we have acquired it, we have not forgotten it every time, we must always be born with the knowledge and live with the knowledge throughout our lives. For that is what knowing is, the retention of knowledge without loss once it has been acquired. For we do refer to forgetting as the loss of knowledge, do we not, Simius?
Entirely so, Socrates, of course.
On the other hand, I presume that if we acquired knowledge before birth and lost it in the process of birth, but later on, by using the senses in this regard, we reacquired the knowledge we previously possessed, then what we call learning would be a reacquisition of our own knowledge. And wouldn't we be right to call this recollection?
Certainly.
In fact, this was shown to be possible, that once we perceive something by sight or hearing, or apprehend it with some other sense, it is possible to bring something else to mind from this, something we have forgotten, something associated with it, which may be like it or unlike it. Consequently, as I say, there are two possibilities. Either we were born knowing these things, and we all know them throughout life, or else later, those who we say are learning are merely remembering. And in that case, learning would be recollection.
Yes, indeed, Socrates. That's how things stand.
Well, which will you choose, Simius? Were we born with the knowledge, or do we recollect later on what had previously been known?
I cannot choose just now, Socrates.
What about this? Can you make a choice and form an opinion about the following? Would somebody who knows be able to give an account of what is known or not?
Yes, this must be so, Socrates.
And do you think that everyone can give an account of the matters we have just been talking about?
I wish they could, but I'm very much afraid that this time tomorrow, there will no longer be a single person who can do this in a worthy manner.
So it does not seem to you, Simmias, that everyone knows this?
Not at all.
Then they are recollecting what was previously learned?
They must be.
When did our souls acquire the knowledge of these things? For evidently, it was not the very moment at which we were born human beings.
Of course not.
So it was before then.
Yes.
So, Simmias, even before then, our souls were there, prior to being in human form without bodies and possessed wisdom.
Unless
Unless we
we
acquire not.
Ooh.
Yeah, sorry, I think that's yours. Yeah.
Unless we acquire knowledge of these at the time we are being born, Socrates, for that particular occasion still remains for consideration.
So be it, my friend. But is there some different occasion when we lose it? For we have just agreed that we are not born possessing this knowledge. So do we lose it at the very time we acquire it? Or can you suggest some other time?
Not at all, Socrates. I was talking nonsense without realizing it.
Well, Simmias, is this how matters stand with us? If on the one hand we are constantly repeating there is beauty and good and all being of that kind, and we refer everything from the senses to this being, rediscovering what existed previously and is our own, and we compare these to this, then just as surely as these exist, so also must our souls exist before we were born. Excuse me. But on the other hand, if these do not exist, this argument would have proceeded differently. So is that how matters stand? Is there an equal necessity that these exist and that our souls exist before we are born? And if these do not exist, neither do those.
Socrates, it certainly seems to me that the necessity is the same, and the argument has taken refuge quite beautifully in the conclusion that the soul's existence before we were born is just as certain as the existence of the being you are now describing. For nothing is so clear to me as the fact that all such things, beauty, good, and all the others you just mentioned, exist. Nothing could be more certain, and in my view, this has been adequately proven.
Now, what about Sebes? For it is also necessary to persuade Sebes.
In my view, it is enough for him too. However, he is the most obstinate of men when it comes to incredulity in the face of arguments. Now, I believe he has been adequately persuaded that our soul existed before we were born, but whether the soul will continue to exist after we die seems unproven even to me, Socrates. Rather, the point made by Sebes still stands. The fear of the multitude that once a person dies, the soul is dispersed, and this is the end of its being. For why could it not arise and be constituted from some other source and exist before it arrives in human form? But once it has arrived and then departed, couldn't it too then come to an end and be destroyed?
You express that well, Simmias. It seems as if what has been proven is half of what is required, that our soul existed before we were born. But is it necessary to add a proof that after we die, it will exist no less than before birth, if the proof is to be complete? Sorry, but it is necessary.
Well, Simmias and Sebes, that has been proven already, provided you combine this argument and the one we agreed upon before this, the one about all the living being born from the dead, into the same argument. But if the soul also exists previously, and it must come to life and come into being from nowhere else but from death and dying, surely it must exist after death, since it has to be born again. So the proof you require has already been given. Nevertheless, I think that you and Simmias would also love to pursue this argument even further, and you are afraid, like children, lest in truth The wind will blow the soul away and scatter it when it departs from the body, especially if someone happens to die, not on a calm day, but during a strong gale.
Try to reassure us, Socrates, as if we were afraid. We are not really afraid, but perhaps there is some child within us who is afraid of such things. So try to persuade him not to fear death as he fears monsters.
Then you should sing charms to him every day until this has been charmed away.
Now, Socrates, where are we going to get a good singer of such charms, since you are leaving us?
Hellas is well-populated Thebes, and there are surely many good men there. And the barbarian peoples are numerous too, so you should search all these thoroughly in pursuit of such a singer of charms, sparing neither money nor effort, for there is no better way to spend your money than on this. But you should also search with one another, for you are unlikely to find anyone more capable of doing this than yourselves.
Very well, this shall be done. However, we should resume the discussion from where we left off, if that is acceptable to you.
Of course it is acceptable. Why wouldn't it be?
Well spoken.
In that case, should we ask ourselves a question like this? To what sort of thing does the fate of being scattered belong? And for what sort of thing should we fear this fate? And what sort of thing escapes it? Then should we go on to investigate which of the two is soul, and on this basis be confident or fearful for our own soul.
What you say is true.
Now, doesn't it belong to something which has been compounded, and which is by nature a compound, to suffer this fate and to be broken up in the same way it was compounded? But if there is anything which is uncompounded, it belongs to this alone, if anything, not to suffer such a fate.
I think this is true.
Now, the things which are always the same and unchanging are most likely to be the uncompounded things, while those which are constantly changing and never the same are those which are compounded. Is this so?
Well, it seems so to me anyway.
Then
Does that
let
make
us
sense
go to
people,
the
the
same
idea of the
things we
compounded and uncompounded from these two states of existence? People have a general idea of that?
Yes.
By compound, he means something that is made up, and something that is not compounded is original and stays as is without change.
Yeah, pure undivisible substance. Yeah.
Compounded to me means just more than one,
Made
like
up of
several
parts.
things together.
Something
yeah.
made up
Mixture.
of parts. Yeah. Yeah, that it's changing, bounded, fluctuating in the, in the realm of becoming.
Shall I continue?
Yep.
Shall I go on?
Sure.
Yes.
And then let us go to the same things we discussed earlier. Is the being itself, whose existence we give an account of through question and answer, always unchanging and the same, or is it constantly changing? The equal itself, the good itself, that which each itself is, and what is, do these ever admit any change whatsoever? Or does that which each of them always is, since it is uniform just by itself, remain the same and unchanging, and never admit any alteration in any respect?
Must remain unchanging and the same, Socrates.
And what about the many beautiful things, such as people or garments, or anything else of that sort, or the many equals, or anything else bearing the same name as those unchanging things? Do these remain the same, or in total contrast to those, are they almost never ever the same as themselves, or one another in any respect at all.
Yes, that is the way they are. They never remain the same.
Now you can touch and see and perceive with the other senses. However, there is nothing else by which you could ever apprehend the unchanging things except the reasoning of the mind. But such things are unseen and not visible. Is this so?
What you are saying is entirely true.
Then would you like us to propose two kinds of things that are, one visible, the other not visible?
Let us propose that.
And does that which is not visible always remain the same, while the visible is never the same?
We should propose this too.
Come then. Do we ourselves consist of anything other than body and soul?
Nothing else?
Now, which kind do we say the body most resembles, and to which it is most akin?
It is obvious to everyone that it resembles the visible kind.
What about the soul? Is it visible or invisible?
It cannot be seen by humans anyway, Socrates.
But surely we meant visible and invisible in the context of the nature of human beings. Or do you think otherwise?
No, the context is the nature of human beings.
Now, what do we say about the soul? That it is visible or that it is invisible?
It is not visible.
So it is invisible then.
Yes.
So the soul is more like the invisible than the body is, while the body is more like the visible.
Yes, Socrates, it absolutely must be.
Well, have you not said this before? Whenever the soul makes use of the body to consider anything, either through sight or through hearing or through any other sense, for consideration through the body means considering anything through the senses. Then the soul is dragged by the body to things which never remain the same. It wanders, is confused, and it is dizzy as though drunk, because it is in contact with things of that sort.
Yes, indeed.
But whenever it considers just by itself, the soul departs to another realm, to the pure, eternal, immortal, and unchanging. And since it is akin to this, it is constantly in its presence whenever it is just by itself and allowed to be so. Then the soul ceases its wandering, associates with these, and remains always the same and unchanging because it is in contact with things of that sort. And this condition of the soul is called wisdom.
What you are saying is entirely beautiful and true, Socrates.
Well then, from what we have already said and are now saying, which of the two kinds does the soul seem to you to resemble, and to which is it more akin?
Socrates, I think that anyone, even the slowest learner, would agree, based upon this approach, that the soul is completely and in every respect more like that which always remains the same rather than that which does not.
What about the body?
It is more like the other kind.
Now look at it this way. Once soul and body are together, nature directs the body to serve and be ruled, and the soul to rule and dominate. And in these respects again, which of them do you think is like the divine and which like the mortal? Or don't you think the divine is naturally fitted to rule and to lead, and the mortal to be ruled and to serve?
Yes, I do.
Right.
Then which of them does the soul resemble?
It is obvious, Socrates, that the soul resembles the divine, while the body resembles the mortal.
Then consider this, Cebes. From everything that has been said, are we to conclude that the soul is most like the divine, immortal, single in form, and indissoluble, which is known by reason and always remains unchanging and the same as itself? And is the body, on the other hand, most like the human, mortal, unreasoning, multiform, and dissoluble, which never remains the same as itself? Do we have anything to say which contradicts this, dear Cebes? Anything which says this is not the case?
We have nothing.
Well then, this being the case, doesn't it belong to the body to be readily dissolved, while the soul, for its part, is entirely indissoluble or almost so?
How could it be otherwise?
Now you realize that when a person dies, his visible part, the body, lying in the visible realm, the thing we call the corpse, is prone to dissolution, decomposition, and dispersal. But none of these processes happens immediately. Instead, it endures for quite a long time. And if someone dies while the body is in good condition and at the right time of life, it lasts even longer. Indeed, once the body has shrunk and has been embalmed as the Egyptians embalmed them, it remains almost entire for a considerable period of time. And even when it decays, some parts of the body, bones and sinews and everything of that sort, are virtually immortal. Isn't this so?
Yes.
But does the soul, the unseen, go to another noble, pure and unseen place of this sort, a true Hades, alongside the good and wise God, whither, God willing, my own soul should go? Is something of this sort, endowed with such a nature, dispersed and destroyed as soon as it departs from the body, as most people say? Far from it, dear Cebes and Simmias. No, the outcome is much more like the following. If the soul were to depart whilst pure, dragging nothing belonging to the body with it, because the soul has no willing communion with it in life, but shunned it and gathered itself into itself, because that is its constant practice, then this is nothing but the proper practice of philosophy and the true practice of dying without reluctance. Or would this not be the practice of death?
Entirely so.
Once it is in this condition, will the soul not journey to that which is like it, to the unseen, the divine, immortal and wise? And on arrival, will blessedness not be its lot, being released from wandering and stupidity, fears and wild passions, and the other evils of the human condition? Then, as they say of the initiated, the soul truly spends the rest of the time with the gods. Should we describe it like this, Cebes, or in a different way?
In this way, by Zeus.
But if, on the other hand, it departs from the body, sullied and impure, because the soul constantly associates with it, serving it and loving it and being enchanted by it through desires and pleasures, so that nothing seems to be true except what has bodily form, what one can touch and see, eat or drink, or use for sexual gratification, while anything obscure to the eyes and unseen, known by reason and apprehended by philosophy, is something it tends to hate, fear, and shun. Do you think that a soul in such condition will depart pure just by itself?
Not at all.
Rather, when penetrated by that which has bodily form, I think this familiarity and association with the body forces the soul to adopt its nature due to the constant association and great concern with the physical.
Yes, certainly.
Well then, my friend, we must accept that this element is burdensome, heavy, earthy, and visible. And indeed, the kind of soul which possesses this is weighed down and dragged once more into the visible realm through fear of Hades and the unseen, and, as the story goes, prowls about memorials and tombs where indeed some shadowy apparitions of souls have actually been seen. These are the visible images of souls of this kind, souls which were not set free in a pure condition, but partaking of the visible, and that is why they can be seen.
Quite likely, Socrates.
Yes, Sebes. And it is also likely that these are the souls not of good, but of degenerate folk, who are compelled to wander about such places, to pay the penalty for their former way of life, which was bad. And they wander until they are bound once more in a body by the desire belonging to the bodily form, their close consort. And quite likely, they are bound in such habits as they have practiced during life.
What sort of habits do you mean, Socrates?
For instance, those who have practiced gluttony, insolence, or drunkenness, rather than avoiding these at all costs, are likely to take on the forms of donkeys or beasts of that sort. Or do you not think so?
What you were saying is certainly very likely.
While those who have preferred injustice, tyranny, and robbery take on the forms of wolves, hawks, and kites, or where else should we say such souls go?
Into creatures of this sort, of course.
And obviously, each of the others would take their course based upon the similarities of their concern.
Yes, that is obvious. How could it be otherwise?
Will the happiest among them not take the best course? Those who have pursued civil and social virtue, which they call sound-mindedness and justice, born of habit and concern, but devoid of philosophy and of reason.
In what sense are they happiest?
Because it is likely that these people return once more to this sort of sociable or gentle class, perhaps as bees, wasps, or ants, or even into the human race again, and from them moderate people are born.
Quite likely.
However, no one but the lover of knowledge, one who has practiced philosophy and departs in an entirely pure condition, is allowed to attain the race of gods. And these are the reasons, Semius, my friend, and you too, Sebes, why those who love wisdom aright abstain from all the desires of the body and resist them and do not give themselves over to them. It is not because they fear poverty or loss of property, like most people who love wealth, nor again do they refrain from them because they are afraid of dishonor or a reputation for depravity, like the lovers of power and reputation.
Indeed, Socrates, that would not be appropriate.
It certainly would not, by Zeus. For in fact, Cebes, those with any concern for their own soul, who do not live their lives fashioning bodies, bid farewell to these fellows, and do not follow the same path as people who do not know where they are going. They do not believe that they themselves should act in opposition to philosophy and the liberation and purifying process it affords. So they turn and follow philosophy wherever it may lead.
How does this happen, Socrates?
I shall tell you. Those who love knowledge realize that when philosophy takes the soul in hand, it is literally fettered within the body, glued to it, and the soul is compelled to view things that are through the body as if it were a prison, rather than viewing them itself through itself. The soul is wallowing in total ignorance, and philosophy discerns the most ingenious aspect of the prison, that it works by means of desires, so that the actual prisoner may be the greatest accomplice in his imprisonment. Now, as I was saying, the lovers of knowledge realize that when philosophy takes their soul in hand in such a condition as this, it exhorts the soul gently and tries to set it free, pointing out that inquiry by means of the eyes is fraught with deceit, and that inquiry by means of the ears and the other senses is also deceptive. Philosophy persuades the soul to withdraw from the senses and use them only as much as necessary, imploring it to collect and gather itself into itself, trust nothing else except its own self and what it can cognize just by itself, about things that are just by themselves. The soul should not believe that what it considers by any other means, things that are different in different circumstances, are true. These are known by the senses and are visible, but what soul sees is known by reason and is unseen by the senses. Now, the soul of the true philosopher does not think that this liberation should be resisted, and accordingly it refrains from pleasures and desires, pains and fears, as much as it is able to, realizing that whenever people experience intense pleasure, pain, fear, or desire, the extent of the evil which afflicts them as a consequence is not what they think it is. It is not disease or some financial loss born of desire. No, it is the greatest and most extreme evil of all. This they experience and do not realize it.
What is this evil, Socrates?
That whilst experiencing intense pleasure or pain, the soul of every person is compelled to believe that whatever is mainly responsible for the experience is completely evident and entirely true, when this is not the case. And these are for the most part visible, aren't they?
Yes, certainly.
Is not the soul completely fettered by the body in this experience.
In what way?
Because each pleasure and pain has a sort of nail which fastens and pins the soul to the body and makes it corporeal, fancying that whatever the body declares to be true is true. For I believe the soul is compelled to become like the body and in manner and in nurture, because it shares the body's opinions and it delights in the same things. And it can never enter Hades in a pure condition, but it always departs contaminated with the body, so that it quickly falls into another body and grows there like a seed that is sown. Accordingly, the soul has no share in the company of the divine, the pure, and the unitary.
What you were saying is very true, Socrates.
Now, Sebes, that is why those who love knowledge aright are orderly and courageous, and not for the reasons that most people give. Or do you think that it is?
I certainly do not.
No, indeed. The soul of the person who loves wisdom would reason as we have described, and would never deign to use philosophy to free itself, and then, once free, give itself over again to pleasure and pain, fetter itself once more, and perform the endless task of Penelope, weaving some web in the opposite direction. Instead, the soul maintains serenity in the face of these, following reason and abiding always in that, beholding what is true and divine and beyond opinion, and being nourished by these. It thinks it should live in this way while it remains alive, and when it dies, arriving among its own kindred and kind, be released from the evils of humanity. Now, there is no danger, Simmias and Sebes, that a soul nourished in this way will be afraid once it has practiced this, afraid that it may be dispersed on departure from the body, be blown away by the wind, take flight, and no longer be anywhere at all.
You need a narrator for the first part of this.
Was that?
You need a narrator for the first part of the next bit.
Oh, okay, I'll do that.
Or we may follow what's happening there and just wait for a few seconds. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'll jump in
Socrates.
with the Phaedo narration.
Yeah.
Now there was silence for quite some time after Socrates had said all of this, and it looked as if he himself was reflecting on the discussion which had concluded, and so too were most of us. But Simmias and Sebes were conversing with one another in whispers. When Socrates noticed them, he asked,
I think you're as the narrator, you're saying this.
Nah, you just jump into it.
No, you can say
Okay,
it.
all right. What is this? Perhaps you think that these arguments have been poorly presented. Of course, they still afford many grounds for suspicion and points of attack, if someone really intends to scrutinize them properly. Now, if you are considering some other issue, then I have nothing to say. However, if some aspect of these arguments is perplexing you, do not hesitate to state it and scrutinize it yourselves, if in your view it could have been better formulated. And what is more, you should include me in the discussion if you think you might make better progress with my involvement.
In fact, Socrates, to tell you the truth, both of us had been perplexed for some time, one urging the other on and telling him to ask you a question, as we wanted to hear your response. However, we were reluctant to make any trouble. in case it might be unpleasant for you because of the present misfortune.
Oh, dear Simmias, I shall certainly have difficulty in persuading other people that I do not regard my present predicament as a misfortune, when I cannot even persuade you too. Instead, you are afraid that I am more ill-tempered now than I have been all my life. And apparently you think I am less of a prophet than the swans who sing throughout their lives, but sing most of all and most beautifully once they realize they must die, rejoicing because they are about to enter the company of the God whom they are serving. But human beings, on account of their own fear of death, utter falsehoods even about the swans, and say that they sing their song of departure in sorrow, lamenting their death. They do not appreciate that no bird ever sings when it is hungry or cold or suffering any other distress, not even the nightingale or the swallow or the hoopoe, birds which are actually said to be singing lamentations in sorrow. But neither these nor the swans appear to me to be singing in sorrow. I think rather that because they are birds of Apollo, swans have prophetic powers, and foreseeing all the good of Hades, they sing and are more delighted on that day than they ever were before. And I myself believe that I am their fellow servant, devoted to the same God, possessing a prophetic power from the Lord, which is no less than theirs, and I am no more distressed than they are to depart this life. So on that account, you should say or ask anything you want, for as long as the 11 officers of the Athenians allow it.
That is beautifully expressed, and I shall tell you what is perplexing me, and Cebes will, in turn, say why he does not accept what has been said. It seems to me, Socrates, and perhaps to you too, that definite knowledge of such matters is either impossible or extremely difficult in this life. That said, however, is a very faint-hearted person who does not scrutinize the arguments about these matters in every manner possible, without giving up until totally exhausted by the inquiry. Where we should proceed on these issues, the best and most unassailable argument of humankind, climb on board that as if it were a raft in a perilous sea, and sail upon it through life, unless one can travel on a more secure vessel, some divine word, safely and free from danger. What is more, I will not be ashamed to ask a question now, in view of what you are saying, nor shall I blame myself later on because I did not say what I am now thinking. Indeed, Socrates, when I consider what has been said, either from my own perspective or from Cebes' perspective, the account does not appear entirely adequate.
And Socrates said,
Perhaps this appearance is true, my friend, but you should explain in what way the account is inadequate.
It seems to me inadequate in this sense. Someone might propose the very same argument in relation to attunement and a lyre and its strings, saying that the attunement is indeed an unseen, non-physical, entirely beautiful and divine element in the tuned lyre, while the lyre itself and its strings are, by contrast, physical objects with physical form. They are compounds, which are earthly and akin to the mortal. So when someone breaks the lyre or cuts and severs the strings, if someone were to maintain the same argument as you, he would say that this attunement must still exist and cannot have perished because there would be no way that the lyre could still exist with its strings severed, strings that are mortal in nature, while the attunement, which is similar in nature and akin to the divine and immortal, perishes before the mortal perishes. He would claim, rather, that the attunement itself must somehow still exist, and the wood and strings must rot away first before anything happens to that. And in fact, Socrates, I think you yourself are aware that this is the sort of thing we actually take the soul to be. It is as if our body is tempered and held together by hot and cold, dry and moist, and the like, and that our soul is a blend and attunement of these very elements once they are properly mixed with one another in a measured way. Now, if the soul happens to be in attunement, it is obvious that whenever the body is relaxed beyond measure or strained by diseases or other evils, the soul, even though it is utterly divine, must perish immediately, just like the other attunements in sounds or in any manufactured objects.
In every other
What
translation that
remains
I've
of
ever
each
seen of this dialogue, it's always been translated as harmony. I've never seen attunement, but I think we all get the
Attunements,
idea.
yeah.
Yeah. But attunement is not bad because in French it would be en accord musical. Okay,
Mhm.
so it would be equivalent to harmonization or harmony.
Okay.
Harmonic resonance, yes.
Oh shit, I screwed up. Sorry.
And what remains of each body must last for a long time until it is either burned up or rots away. So consider this. How shall we respond to this argument if someone asserts that the soul, being a blend of elements in the body, is the first thing to perish in what we call death?
Socrates, as he so often did, stared openly, smiled, and said, but Socrates was on mute, unfortunately, so he had to unmute himself, and then he said,
Thank you. Yes, you're quite right. That's Matthew being more resourceful than me. Okay. Simius is making a fair point. Now, if anyone here is more resourceful than I am, why do they not respond to him? For he actually does seem to be coming to terms with the argument quite well. However, before we respond, I think it is useful to hear first with what further objection Siebes is raising about the argument. That will give us time to decide what we shall say. And then, once we have heard them both, we shall agree with them if their objections seem to ring true in any other way, and if not, then we shall proceed to defend the argument at that stage. So come on, Siebes, speak up. What else was bothering you?
Speak I shall, for it appears to me that the argument is still in the same predicament and is open to the same objection we stated previously. I will not retract the argument that our soul existed even before it entered this form, as this has been elegantly and, if it is no exaggeration to say so, quite thoroughly proven. However, the argument that it still exists somehow after we die does not seem to me to have been proven. I do not accept Simius's point that the soul is less strong and less enduring than the body, for I think it is far superior in all these respects. So the argument might ask me, why are you still incredulous when you can see that the weaker part still exists after the person dies? Do you not accept that the more enduring part must still be alive, must still survive at that particular time? Now determine whether my response to this makes any sense. Indeed, just like Simius, it seems I shall also need to use an image. For I think that what is being said is quite like the following argument about an old man, a weaver who has died. Someone might say that the man has not perished, but is somehow alive and well, and they might offer the garment that he used to wear and which he had woven himself as evidence, because it is safe and sound and has not perished. And if anyone was unconvinced by this, he might ask them whether a human being is longer lasting than a garment he uses and wears, and having received the answer that the person is much longer lasting, he might think he had proved that the person is alive and well, since the less enduring object has not perished. But I do not think that this is the case, Simius, so consider what I'm about to say. Everyone would appreciate that this is a ridiculous argument to propose, because this weaver, having woven and worn out many such garments, has perished after them, although they were many. However, I presume he perished before the last of them, and a man is not in any degree inferior to or weaker than a garment on that account. Now, I think the soul's relation to the body would admit the same comparison. And anyone who uses these very arguments in that context would appear to me to be speaking reasonably, because the soul is long-lasting, while the body is weaker and less enduring. He would argue that, in fact, each of the souls wears out numerous bodies, especially if it lives for many years. For if the body is in flux and is in perishing while the person is still alive, then the soul is constantly weaving anew whatever has been worn away. Yet when the soul perishes, it must be wearing the last garment it wove, and it must perish before that one, and that one alone. And with the perishing of the soul, the body would demonstrate its natural weakness at that stage and would quickly rot away and be gone. Accordingly, we should not yet deem this argument worthy of belief and be confident that our soul will still exist after we die. For suppose we were to make even more concessions to this disputant than you suggest, and grant to him that our soul exists, not only in the interval before our birth, but concede there is no reason why, in some cases, it should not still exist even after we die, and continue to exist, and be born and die again many times, as the soul is so strong by nature that it can withstand being born many times. You might want to bring it up, Matthew. Yet having granted this, we would still not accept that the soul is unaffected during its multiple births, and that it will not come to an end during one of the particular deaths and perish completely. But he would reply that no one has ever known the particular death and the particular dissolution of the body which brings destruction to the soul, since it is impossible for any of us to be aware of it. And if this is the case, is it not appropriate for anyone to have confidence in the face of death, a confidence which is not unreasonable, unless you can prove that the soul is completely immortal and indestructible? Otherwise, anyone who is about to die must be in constant fear on behalf of his own soul, lest it perish utterly during its present separation from the body.
Now, when the rest of us had heard them saying all this, we became unsettled, as we confessed to one another afterwards, because having been strongly persuaded by the previous argument, Simmias and Cebes now seemed to be disturbing us once more and casting us into doubt, not only in relation to the earlier discussion, but also in relation to matters we would discuss later on. We feared that we might not be worthy judges of anything, or even that the issues themselves might be subject to doubt. Echecrates. Jump in, Echecrates.
I don't think we've nominated any of these speakers yet, Matthew.
I know. I'm just waiting for somebody to nominate themselves.
I'll do it. Am I muted? Okay, yeah, I am. By the gods, Phaedo, I have sympathy for you. In fact, when I heard you saying this just now, I started thinking to myself, what argument can we still believe in? The argument presented by Socrates was highly persuasive, but now its credibility has collapsed. In fact, this argument that our soul is an attunement is extraordinarily captivating to me now, and it always has been. And when you mention this, it reminds me that I hold these views already. And I really need some other argument to convince me once more from the beginning that the soul of a dying man does not die along with him. So tell me, by Zeus, how did Socrates pursue the argument? And what about the man himself? Did he show any sign of being upset like the rest of you, or did he defend the argument calmly? And did he defend it adequately, or were there deficiencies? Tell us everything as precisely as you can.
Oh, sorry. Well, now, Echecrates, I had been amazed by Socrates many times before, but I was never as delighted as I was in his company at that moment. The fact that the man had something to say was not really anything unusual, but I was most amazed, firstly, at the pleasant, gracious, and admiring way he accepted the argument of the young men, also by how keenly he discerned how we had been affected by their arguments, and finally, by how well he cured us, rallied us as if we were fleeing in defeat, and turned us around to follow him and examine the argument together.
How did he do this?
I shall tell you. I was sitting to his right on a small stool beside the bed, and he was seated much higher up than me. He stroked my head and gathered up the hair around my neck, for he was accustomed on occasion to play with my hair.
Tomorrow, perhaps you will cut off these beautiful locks, Phaedo.
Quite likely, Socrates, I replied.
Not if you let me persuade you.
What would happen then? I said.
I will cut my hair today, and you will cut these locks if our argument meets its end and we prove unable to bring it back to life. And if I were you and the argument got away from me, I would take an oath, just like Argives, not to let my hair grow until I had defeated the arguments of Simmias and Cebes in a fresh battle.
But, said I, they say that even Heracles could not do battle against two.
Then call upon me, your Iolus, so long as it is still daylight.
Yes, I shall call upon you, I said. But I am no Heracles. I am Iolaus, calling upon Heracles.
It will make no difference. But first let us beware that a particular misfortune does not befall us.
What? I asked.
Let us not become haters of discourse, just as some people become haters of humanity. But there is no greater evil that could befall a person than developing a hatred of discourse. But hatred of discourse and hatred of humanity both arise in the same manner. The hatred of humanity arises from placing a strong trust in someone without any experience and believing the person to be entirely true, sound, and trustworthy, but finding a little later that he is evil and untrustworthy. And if this happens again with someone else, and the man has this experience frequently, especially with people he regards as his closest acquaintances and best friends, he ends up being buffeted so often that he hates everyone and believes that no one is in any way sound at all. Or have you never noticed this happening before?
I have indeed, I replied.
Now, is this not shameful? And is it not obvious that such a person is attempting to deal with humanity without any experience in human affairs? Or presumably, if he had any skill when he dealt with them, he would have realized how matters stand, that those who are extremely good and those who are extremely evil are both rare, while those in between are many.
What do you mean? I asked.
Take extremely large and small things as an example. Do you think that there is anything rarer than finding an extremely large or extremely small man or dog or any other animal? And does not the same also apply to quick and slow, ugly and beautiful, white and black? Have you not noticed that in all such cases, the utmost extremes are rare and few, while those in between are plentiful and numerous?
Yes, indeed, I replied.
Do you not think that if a competition in badness were instituted, very few people would prove to be in the first rank?
Quite likely, I replied.
Likely indeed, but arguments are not similar to people in this respect. No, you gave a lead just now and I followed it. The similarity shows itself rather when someone who lacks any skill in relation to arguments believes a particular argument to be true, and then a little later the argument seems to him to be false. And sometimes this is the case, and sometimes it is not. And this happens again and again. And you know that those who have spent a lot of time in disputatious arguments finally decide that they have become the wisest of men that they alone have realized that there is nothing sound or certain either in the things themselves or in the arguments, but that all of the things that are literally being turned upwards and downwards as if they were in the strong tides of the Euripus, never constant for a moment.
Yes, certainly, I replied. What you are saying is true.
Now, Phaedo, would it not be a sad situation if there were, in fact, some true and certain argument that was capable of being understood, and yet through encounter with some arguments of this sort, the kind which seemed true one moment and false the next, a man were to blame not himself or his own lack of skill, but was finally in such pain that he gladly pushed the blame away from himself onto the arguments, and spent the rest of his life from then on hating and reviling arguments, and was deprived of the truth and knowledge of things that are.
Yes, by Zeus, I replied. A sad situation indeed.
Well, first and foremost, we should guard carefully against this, and never allow into our souls the notion that no arguments are sound. Instead, it is much better to accept that we are not yet in a sound condition ourselves, and that we should take courage and be eager to attain a sound condition, you and the others, for the sake of the rest of your lives, and I for the sake of death itself. Yes, I am unlikely to retain a philosophical approach to this particular issue under the present circumstances, but like highly uneducated folk, I may become keen on victory. For whenever such people are debating about something, they do not consider what the argument is about and the status of that. Instead, they are eager that whatever they themselves have proposed be accepted by those who are present. And I think that I differ from them only to this extent at present. I am not eager, except incidentally, that what I am saying should seem true to the people here, but that it should seem as true as possible to me. For I reckon, dear friend, and you should note how greedy I am, that if what I am saying happens to be true, it is really good to be persuaded by it. But if in fact there is nothing for people who have died, then in this interval before my own death, I shall still be less bothersome to the company with my lamentations, and my ignorance will not persist to the last, for that would have been terrible. But it will come to an end quite soon. Well, Simmias and Cebes, now I'm fully prepared. I am now fully prepared to embark upon the discussion. You, however, if you take my advice, should pay little regard to Socrates and much more regard to the truth. And if I actually seem to you to be saying anything true, then you should agree. But if not, you should resist with every possible argument, being careful lest in my eagerness I deceive both myself and yourselves at the same time, and depart like a bee, leaving my sting behind.
All right, I think that's probably a good place to stop for tonight, because we're about to shift gears now and enter into a new phase of the argumentation. So let's just
It might be good for all of us to go back and review what we've read today, because it's kind of all over the place, isn't it?
well, there's definitely been some wrenches thrown into the machine. That's for sure. Yeah. Did you guys remember what or could anybody want to recapitulate what Simmias and Cebes? Actually, you know what? We can maybe review on our own, and then next week we'll have somebody do the recapitulation of what the two problems that Simmias and Cebes threw out there, which almost derailed or might have totally derailed Socrates' proof of the immortality of the soul and thrown everyone into an existential crisis. So who wants to be?
Cebes certainly doesn't admit it.
No, not yet. But who wants to be the recapper next week of today's little exploration?
did a damn good job.
Well,
Yeah,
yes,
Brandy, I'm going to nominate
perfect.
you
He
again because
just
you
did
did such a
that.
good job today.
I'll do it again. It helps me learn. I don't mind.
All right, Brandy, courageous Brandy. All right, Socrates.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
I loved
Oh,
this
he's on
little.
mute, Vinny.
Was that?
Oh, Vinny was saying something, but he's on mute.
Oh, yeah, Vinny. Yeah.
I was just saying that she likes doing the review. She likes doing that kind of thing. She does it all the time.
I was the girl that liked homework in school.
Yeah.
Cool.
I always did mine at the last minute.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Dog ate mine.
Yeah. No, Brandy thought ahead. She thought about her future self not wanting to suffer the stress that we all felt having procrastinated to the last minute. Good. Very Promethean. No, I loved really his little mini segue though, where he just quickly makes a commentary that's so insightful about those who become haters of people, misanthropes, and those who become haters of ideas and argumentation, which both have the sort of same source, where you give your faith over misguidedly to somebody who professes to have wisdom, but then you discover that they're hypocrites or liars, and then rather than realizing that you personally made an incompetent, immature decision to give your faith to that person, you then end up hating people. You're like, everyone's a hypocritic backstabber or whatever. Or you do the same thing to ideas themselves. You're like, I really believed one line of thinking, and then something else proved that there was a flaw in my thinking, and so it's ideas that I hate now rather than my own sloppiness that caused me to hold on to an insufficient idea. It's a really important idea that he threw out there. And you encounter it so much.
Gosh, Matt, it hardly sounds like today, does it?
Almost really.
Yeah,
Hey, you can just 2,000 years, 2,500 years ago, it's this exact same problems that people
Exactly
are
the
wrestling
same.
with. Yeah, totally.
Totally.
Yeah.
We hear this all the time in some of your discussions online, Matthew, in relation to the minions of the WEF.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about the other day was that one of the enduring problems that I'm noticing is that people tend to think that, okay, you had goodness, you had like John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, you had Benjamin Franklin, the American Revolution in the past, because the past was simpler times where things were just simple, and you could just like fight for the good and be a good person and use political power to do the good. But now things are fifth dimensional asymmetrical war, or fifth generation warfare. Everything is so sophisticated and complicated now, and so much more advanced and Byzantine. And it's like, no, we've been dumbed down. So we think our today's world is so much more complex than it was in the past. But if you actually look at the type of thinking and the type of like intricate, sophisticated epistemological warfare that Martin Luther King or Ben Franklin or Lincoln were actually operating within, it was just as complicated as it was today. And same thing for Plato and his world. It didn't get, it didn't get more sophisticated in some ways. It did on a material level. There's 8 billion of us, and there's computers and derivatives and things like that. So complexity, is higher, but it's the same quality of sophistication. Our standards have fallen too far.
Very much.
Confusion reigns.
Matt, I have a question. It kind of sounds like, from what Socrates is saying, it kind of sounds like he is associating the soul with the intellect. And it doesn't sound like he has any interest in anything like intuition. Can you comment on that?
I'd like to hear. I could say a
associate-
word, but I'd be curious to see what other people say, especially Quan. What are your thoughts on that, Quan?
I would say that I will come back with my usual answer. Okay, you have to know to play with words, because once again, the Socratic dialogues are not a list of answers, but rather the process. So you always need to know in the context of a specific paragraph. Was he speaking of logos 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6? Okay, it's true that The intellect is logos too. We can use many words for the 6 layers of the mind, but my two favorite words are logos and semeion. Okay, I use two Greek words because after all, we are in a Greek dialogue. And semeion is a Greek word meaning representation. So the intellect by itself is not a bad thing. And when you have a dialogue, you have the inevitable impression that it's about the intellect, but is that the intellect accompanied by the presence of awareness, okay? Because, and here you need to read between the lines. He will necessarily and inevitably use words to present his arguments, but those arguments are together with the presence of awareness. And it's in the quality of the reasoning that you will find that difference. And I would say that Simius and Brandy, I don't want to prevent you to offer the most outstanding summary next time, but I will say a little bit about the fact that Simius offer probably the most powerful argumentation in the time dimension about the fact that the soul is the product of a harmonization of the body. And if you read the preliminary answer by Socrates after, let's say, pages 27 to page 30, which is Simius' argument, and after that, Socrates began to answer, but not offering his complete answer. And I would like to mention that the core of Socrates' answer is to attain to a sound condition, okay? And that is an answer that is rooted in intuition and not in intellect. And to attain to a sound condition is precisely to attain to holiness or to be whole, as I said, I think last time, having the 6 layers of your epistemological development. So he answered intellectually because he doesn't have a choice than to use words and metaphors and images, but you have to take into account the whole dialogue to see that he answered intuitively, or I would prefer to say with direct vision, because he had true knowledge, meaning that he was truly rooted in his being, pure awareness. I'm sorry for the long answer, but sometimes I need to use many sentences to express what I think.
Just like Socrates.
Okay, thanks.
I'll just add something to that. I think we have to wait for the rest of the dialogue, because
yes,
in making these two examples about hatred of humanity and hatred of discourse, he's just saying, thank you for not simply believing in me and raising these arguments. You should not believe anybody immediately. That's his main point at this point.
Yeah.
Of course, later on in the dialogue, he's going to quote Matthew, he's going to demolish the objections raised by Simius and Sebes. We still have to get there. Okay?
Exactly.
That's right.
And you need to attain to a sound condition to be capable
but the sound condition,
to answer by yourself.
I'm not on the same page as you, Quan, on this. That when he's saying sound condition, he's just saying you haven't reached a level of maturity of your mind that you make immature, rash judgments in trusting people, and you accept ill-considered arguments, and then you get frustrated because the fault is in you, not in there may be faults elsewhere, but the fault was that you trusted them. That's all he's saying at this point, and that's what he means by sound condition. However, earlier on, that's just my take on it. But earlier on in what he has presented so far, he gave a kind of a preview that to get to the sound condition that Quan alluded to just now, the true vision, the true knowledge of the truth, he talks about how it can be achieved. The only way is for the soul to completely withdraw into itself, by itself, and exclude everything relating to the body. And that, to me, is a direct reference to the practice of meditation.
Yes.
Be still and know
But
There's quite a way that it could be done.
I
I'm sorry?
I absolutely agree with you, Harinder, but I would like to be a little bit stubborn here because he
A little
gave the
bit?
answer a little bit stubborn here, and I would
Stubborn,
like
yeah.
to use, yes, I would like to use a little bit the intellectual argument that he gave, that the first layer of answer about the sound, attain to a sound condition. I agree with you, okay? Meaning try to attain to a mature mind. Absolutely, we agree on that. But I would like to say that the second layer of how to attain to a sound condition, he gave that answer in his first reply between pages 23 and 26. And at the end of that first part of his argumentation, if you remember, there was a stunning silence from everyone. And I would dare to say that he was capable to precisely make those people experience live meditation, okay? Because of course that silence was an external silence, but most of the time that external silence is correlated with an internal silence. And we all know that the experience of meditation is precisely to be in the gaps of true silences between the thoughts. So I would like to say that at page 23, he said that the true practice of philosophy is precisely to be the lover of knowledge and of wisdom. And that is the one possible definition, in using words and intellect to talk about what you said, meditation.
Can I ask the favor of either Kwan or Harinder to put into simple words what the point of difference is that you guys have in your approach to thinking about what Socrates is saying? Because I'm not totally clear on what the divergence is.
Okay, the divergence is to explain the 5 words to attain to a sound condition, and those 5 words appear on page 31. Okay, so I agree with what Harinder said, that to attain to a sound condition, that Socrates only meant reach to a mature state, okay, so that your mind is more capable to take right decisions and not to be mesmerized by others. That's the first meaning of attain to a sound condition that Harinder and I share. But the second thing that I said, that attain to a sound condition, meaning to have the 6 layers of the mind, meaning that not only to have the logos 1, 2, 3, but also logos 4, 5, 6, meaning sense of perception, intellect, psyche, but also beauty, goodness, and truth. And what Harinder was not in agreement with me is that Socrates at page 31 did not touch to that, but I disagree, because even before page 31, between page 23 to page 26, Socrates was giving a living experience how a true master of meditation, by his attitude, by his words, because that is the art of a master of meditation, okay? How to make that person live the true living experience of inner silence. And you have sometimes to use words, to use tricks, to use your attitudes, to laugh, because you notice that in the dialogue, Socrates laughed many times. And all those are attitudes bringing the person to that living experience of deep inner silence, which is meditation.
Okay, now I get your point now, Kwan. Just a clarification, because I have not personally been made myself aware of the 6 logoses. So the top 3 logoses, which you said is beauty, truth, and goodness. So those are the things that he describes as the intangibles, the equal, of which the soul has prior knowledge, right? So that's the same thing?
Yes, that's the same thing. And I would like once again to repeat the 3 words that Plato used for 4, 5, and 6. It's beauty, of course, but beauty is the well. I think that those who often have to hear to my speeches know my expression axio-epistemo-political triangle. Beauty, goodness, and truth is the axio words to describe 4, 5, and 6, okay? But if you use the epistemological words to describe 4, 5, and 6, those epistemological words are dialekton and theoria, okay? Dianoia is going through forms. Dialecticon is playful exploration, and Socrates is showing a true living example of playful exploration in this dialogue, because that is the most difficult thing to make people realize in reality, being pure awareness. And theoria is at the top, meaning that that person is contemplation of the form. But here we have to understand to be rooted in being, to be really alive in true knowledge, to be in pure formless awareness. And between pages 23 and 26, I think that we should write it in gold. We have the living experience of a true master of meditation, combining words, concept, and his attitudes to provoke that silence. Okay, and that is truly a masterpiece.
Okay.
And here, well, that's one of my obsession, to make people understand that at the highest of philosophy, there's no east, there's no west, there's no south, there's no north, there's only one common humanity.
We can meditate to get in touch with our soul, but we're born into these bodies, and like for a purpose, and we have to, like, that's why we're here, to intermingle that soul with our bodies. And from what I'm learning here, it seems to be like our using that truth, goodness, and beauty in that relationship, and to experience the world.
Exactly.
For whatever purpose that is for each.
Is Kelly speaking? Is your name Kelly? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, Kelly.
Yes.
So you know that every religion, including the Christian religion, talks about salvation. So what is the objective? To experience this world, or to escape from it, be saved? What is it that we are to be saved from, if this is not a place where the dominant feature is evil? And later on in the dialogue, he talks about the body being a mass of evil and so on, but he's already given a hint about that. So why does every religion talk about salvation, if this place is a good place to be?
A good question.
That's I just plant that seed. That's all. So the body is leading us to physical expressions, and yeah, there is value in all of that, but it is a source of desires of a physical form, whereas the soul's potential is for something much higher, much greater. So that's what
I don't want to interrupt, but here...
Yeah, correct me if you throw anything you want, yeah.
Yes, I would like to throw in something, because when I was speaking of the axio-epistemo-political triangle, I forgot the dimension of political precisely, because I think that your question is very deep, Harinda, but I have the following suggestion. I think that the axial dimension through the epistemological dimension can be translated in the political reality. I think that to be the salvation precisely is not necessarily to escape from this physical body, but to embody beauty, goodness, and truth through this body. Once again, since we are speaking of Greek stuff, I would like to introduce 3 Greek words, okay? Well, 2 Greek words and 1 Latin word. The axial dimension is tempus. The epistemological dimension, the channel between timelessness and time, is kairos. And that kairos is precisely the epistemological journey. And when that epistemological journey is capable to educare, to bring forth what is within, and what is within precisely is in the fabric of the universe, beauty, goodness, and truth, it will translate into the political or the behavioral dimension, if you want. And normally, if you truly have beauty, it translates into the political dimension as justice. If you truly have goodness, it will translate into the political dimensions as valor or courage and humanity. And if you truly have truth, it will translate into the political dimension as wisdom. So my hypothesis about salvation is not necessarily to escape from this earth, but to be capable to act with wisdom, courage, humanity, and justice, because you went through an epistemological journey and you truly live beauty, goodness, and truth that are on precisely the soul dimension or the timeless dimension. Then you gap time and timelessness.
I was thinking a little bit about the thesis of Friedrich Schiller, the poet and playwright that Cynthia's written a lot about, and there's something that he did on the nature of the duty of the artist back in the 18th century that I thought was a profound idea that sort of reminds me a little bit of what you're saying, and I might be wrong, but he had basically made a comment that when the tastes of a society become corrupted, the artist would be shamed to be a popular caterer to or flatterer to the prejudices and corrupt tastes of that society, you know, giving the people what they want if what they want is crap. You'd be actually doing damage to yourself as a creator and damage to the people who want your creations as an artist, right? And so he said, you know, but the problem is the artist still can influence society in a very important way. In fact, when the leadership of a society and the masses both become corrupt, you're screwed, right? Unless the artists can kick in with their ability to communicate very, very difficult concepts in a poetic and playful, free way, right? So, and he's like, but to speak in a way to people in a corrupt time that they can recognize and take in requires that you clothe your stories or your poetry or whatever with some of the images, the styles of the time. So he said, Friedrich Schiller said, woe to him who is a creature of his age, because the true artist should be the child of all ages. So sort of like have and he calls for the artist to have cultivated his soul on the immortal ideas and found a way to wrap them in a material form so that they could be received to other mortals, right? But you're taking the eternal ideas that Plato's getting at and finding a way to clothe them. And it's hard to do. Very few artists do it, but some do.
Yeah.
And I guess that's sort of the challenge is to use our time on Earth in such a way that we can be conduits of the eternal, that we infuse into the finite realm and try to resonate and uplift or awaken that fire in other people that will be passed on, you know, and in so doing probably tap in spiritually to that eternal realm while we are alive to better prepare ourselves for what comes after we die at the same time, right? So it's not just like one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. At the same time, exactly. In the sense that after all the meditation masters said that if you're truly rooted in being, you're always in the timeless dimension anyway. Okay, so if you're truly rooted in being, even on Earth, you're in the timeless dimension. There's no difference.
I have a question for Quan. This is so you had said in the last in the Theaetetus studying that children up to the age of 5 are the aristocratic man. Like they have an awareness that I guess at some point maybe more of a closeness to their creator or something. And so my question is, are there questions that you can ask a child up to the age of 5? I don't know, that could that you could provoke I don't know, an interesting answer, almost like a proof of the aristocratic man.
Yes, but I would say that the child till ages 5, 6, 7, or even 8, 9, for those who are very rooted in their being, they would ask very spontaneous why questions, okay? And like why the sky is blue, okay? Why red is red? Why the sun is warm, okay? That kind of things. And you can ask those questions, but don't worry, they won't ask those questions themselves. And is interesting, because I like very much to talk to children under the age of 10, okay? And most of the time, their answers are very creative because they are not poisoned by the answer that have been given in school. I'm not against school, understand me, okay? But
Well, I understand what you're saying.
but inevitably, the school will transmit a certain dominant culture, and in that dominant culture, you learn that there are some answers that are favored compared to others. And the aristocratic man precisely is the man capable of that playful attitude, okay? And most of the normal children would keep that playful attitude between 0 and 10, but most of the time now, maybe it's between 0 and 5, 6. And from 5, 6, you have to be very careful to give to the children a good education in the sense, educare, to bring forth what is from within, beauty, goodness, and truth, so that playful attitudes will be kept in teenage and in young adulthood and in the rest of the life. Because after all, when the meditation master said that if you are truly rooted in being, you're always in timelessness, that is the aristocratic attitude, that is the playful attitude. Because if you're always rooted in timelessness, you will be cheerful and curious and aristocratic in any circumstances.
Yeah, because I wanted to do a little experiment. I have 2 4-year-old grandsons. And so, yeah, I kind of wanted to just ask them some questions like that, like what they see when they look up at the sky or when they close their eyes, or, I was just looking for some, if I was in the right direction as far as questions go, just to see what they say. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With my pleasure.
Yeah, I guess that's the key thing, right? Even you see it in Christianity, with the idea that Christ always sort of goes back to that we have to be like children, and only the children will make it into the kingdom of heaven, because obviously we lose something as we start developing these crusts of ego, and we lose our awe and admiration of the world in an egoless way. Which we have naturally as children. So the true, and Confucius describes this from the standpoint of the gentleman, right? The true leader, the true, as Juan would say, the aristocrat, always has that childlike quality as well, that he defends at all costs throughout his life. So you're not afraid to ask the stupid questions. Whereas a lot of other people who are afraid of, like, what are other people going to think of me? Where the ego's like layered on. They do themselves a disservice by withholding their curiosity, which is what Socrates was encouraging, of those 13 or 14 disciples sitting around him, all said only Cibius and Cebes had the courage to ask the tough questions. And Socrates was so happy. He's like, yes, that's good. He was so proud of them. Because everyone else is just a little bit too adulty.
I'm going to say something again, which may come across as controversial. I think Socrates is not just a great mind, he's himself a great master. And if you truly compare what the things that Jesus has written, of which we don't know that much because we don't have as detailed accounts, we have bits and pieces in the full Gospels. Whereas with Socrates, Plato has given us extensive discussions, right? There's a lot of similarity in the things, but it would take me another half an hour to an hour to discuss, so I'm not going to do it. I'm just leaving that idea that this man is not just a great thinker, and he's alluding to something very similar to the concept of salvation. because he says, I want to go to the race of the gods. I don't want to sully my soul with anything having to do with the body, because that'll bring me back down.
Yeah. No.
I can't have.
Well, it's, sorry. Go ahead, please.
Just a very quick one. I can't help but come back to ideas on reincarnation. The Buddhist idea, for example, is to escape the cycle of reincarnation and to move into the area of the gods. I don't know whether that qualifies, Harinder, as your idea of salvation, but just, you know,
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does.
Yeah, I'm surprised they use reincarnation, like in the dialogue. They mention that word several times.
He doesn't mention the word reincarnation particularly, but he gives examples of how.
Yeah, like when we come back from, you know, the previous life.
Well,
certain types of human beings will come back as certain types of other animals, etc., etc. You know, the cunning and the crafty will come back as wolves, etc., etc. I mean, there's lots of references in that dialogue we just read to aspects of reincarnation without there being a solid foundation to those references yet. I'm keen to see what happens with the rest of what we read, in fact.
Well, there I would sort of disagree with you. The foundation he has given, he says, it's right now the soul is intermingled. It's living in the body, and if you want to rise to a higher place, you have to completely free your soul from any desire for the body or for the things, pleasures that the body can experience. And the mind of the body also. The mind also has its own pleasures. So that process of dissociation he calls philosophy. And by the way, in one of the translations I'd read, the definition of philosophy that he makes is not what we may understand. He breaks it down into philo, being love, and sophia, being wisdom, which is not the wisdom that we understand, but the highest wisdom, the wisdom that created the universe, and therefore a reference to God. So his definition of philosophy is a love of God, as I understand it. Okay, so he's saying you want the wise person, as he defines it, will not want to be attached to the pleasures of the body, which will sully the soul and lower it, weigh it down with the desires of the body, and bring it back, which is the same idea that the Buddha says. Desires give you suffering because desires will bring you back to this place where, as Socrates said at the beginning of the dialogue, pleasure and pain are joined at the hip. And a specific example of that is, let's say you have somebody that you love very much, a daughter or a pet. That same creature can give you enormous happiness, but if something happens to that person or that pet, that same person or creature becomes a source of suffering. So that's what he meant, in my opinion, when he says, in this world, in the material world, even God could not separate the two. Or he says, if Aesop had made a fable about it, he would have said, you know, they were joined at the hip, and nature could not separate them. Which is one reason why the philosopher wants to not come back. And the other reason, which I think he gives later on in the dialogue, is everything here is temporal. It's all passing. You can never take anything with it. It will not stay. It's changing always, and it's not permanent. So the wise man wants to go to a place of permanence where there is only beauty, goodness, and truth. That's my understanding, and I know maybe I'm simplifying it a bit.
But you know, that place of permanence can be on Earth, no? If you're rooted in
you have to reach it while you are here. You have to attain that, what you call the timeless dimension, being rooted in as pure a being as possible.
Yes.
But in the end, the wise person, as like this guy, doesn't want to have to come back here, because there are higher dimensions. We know from string theory now.
Okay, but what are you making of the concept of the bodhisattva in Buddhism? The bodhisattva is the guy having attained enlightenment, but he wants to stay on earth to be useful for his fellow human beings.
That's a very sort of enlightened. That's a very high profession if he wants to do that. Yeah, to help others. Yeah.
Isn't
help
that
others.
isn't that the same as the Platonic ideal, Juan?
Yes, absolutely. Because once
Yeah.
again, let's not be mesmerized by the difference in vocabularies. Okay,
Yeah.
the philosopher king is the enlightened man. Okay, in the East, the philosopher king is called a Buddha, or in the West, a Buddha is called a philosopher king. So let's not be mesmerized by difference in
No,
vocabularies.
I'm not actually we are actually talking about two things. You said an enlightened person, the bodhisattva, may want to remain on this earth to be of help to others, right? To enlighten other minds. But what I'm saying is that Socrates is saying he's doing it while he's here, but he's happy to be going because he wants to be in another place.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you, Harinder, on that. But I would say that once again, because he is rooted in his being,
He's
either
absolutely rooted. He's absolutely rooted. Yeah.
exactly, and because of it, his reality is not dependent on where he is,
Exactly.
because that reality of timeless dimension is with him. Wow, I think that you know that expression as I know, and maybe even better than me. He is in his true nature, and being in his true nature, he can be anywhere, and he would be in heaven.
He has mastered his soul so that it is not influenced by the body. Yeah.
Exactly.
In his own words, yeah.
Exactly. And the body is only the instrument that would transmit to your mind the environment. But if he's abiding in his soul, meaning in his timeless dimension, the body is his servant and not his master, because the soul is the master.
Whereas in a majority of cases, or in many cases, as he describes, that the degenerate people whose souls are contaminated by the body, it is the soul that is being ruled by the body.
Absolutely.
The body's desires are dictating the soul's thinking, and he even uses words. The soul will be influenced by the body, and words to that effect. I don't remember the exact words.
Exact. Or the soul forget that he is the master. You know the metaphor.
Exactly, and becomes the slave of the body. Yeah,
exactly. So educare, to bring forth what is from within, is to make the soul remember that he is the master.
Yeah.
Yep.
It reminds me of this poem. Is anyone familiar with? It's called "The Song of the Pearl."
No.
It's I'm not sure where it came from, but it's one of the writings in the Nag Hammadi scrolls. That's from they found a lot of the lost books of the Bible and stuff. I think it was in Egypt. Anyways, this poem, it was about a prince, I believe, and it's like he's in heaven with his father, but he comes down into the world, and when he comes here, he forgets. He can't remember where he came from, but he has a mission when he comes into this world, and then so when he arrives here, it's like when he's young, he does kind of goes on this mission, but he gets sidetracked and all this stuff, and then as he's living his life, I guess he's got these protectors that come and like help him remember what his true mission was. And then in the end of the poem, he actually remembers what he's supposed to do. He completes his task and he goes back into the other world. And he goes to his rightful place with his father. It's kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called The Song of the Pearl. It's I thought everybody knew about it.
No, it's absolutely in sync, and this is if you examine every scripture, they all have the same. Every religion, every scripture has a very similar ideas behind it. They're presented in different ways.
I think this belongs to one of those Gnostic texts.
Yeah.
And what is it? I'm going to ask Matthew to define gnosis right now.
Not gnosis.
What's your understanding of?
My
talked
my
about
understanding
Gnostic, right?
is secret knowledge.
Right, the highest knowledge. That's
The highest, yeah.
In other words,
usually in
I
the
think
form of like something that cannot be communicated through any literal communication, but can only be known through nonlinear
inner experience.
expressions
I would say.
that yeah of the action of the soul, which are not bounded by the domain of simple intellect, of logic, and perhaps can be easily confused by virtue of its nature when you try to you try to put a word on something, and if that thing is not expressible by a word, it could mislead obviously the lower intellects who try to understand it by a word. I don't know, that's how I think about it.
I think it's the highest knowledge that Socrates is talking about. The knowledge that enables him to be in touch with all the highest ideas that he describes, the equal, the justice, the beauty, etc. And so gnosis is the process of that knowledge at that level. That's my submission. I'm going to
sounds like a healthy interpretation. I don't think Socrates would disagree.
Yeah. Anyway, on a very low to down to earth level, gnosis is a Greek word meaning knowledge. Okay, and in the Phaedo dialogue, what is the subject of the Phaedo dialogue? It's knowledge with a capital K, or if you prefer, the soul.
Yes, spiritual knowledge, in other words.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the thing that I've noticed is that the oh, sorry, Paul, what was that?
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Matthew.
I was just going to say the thing that I noticed is that very often the idea of Gnostic or gnosis becomes defined. There's a definition imposed that it is intrinsically unintelligible, and thus not accessible to the soul of the uninitiated, because by its nature it is unknowable. And I think that is based upon a limited false idea of what knowledge actually is. You know, whereas if you could say that knowledge is just basic, like the effects of logic, sure, what I just said is true. But if you allow for creativity, insight, conscience into your concept of what allows for knowledge to exist, then that which falls under the category of Gnostic becomes very intelligible and accessible to anybody who has an honest heart. And that's where I think a lot of the misuse of it, you know, because there's obviously a lot of evil things that are done under the guise of gnosis.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's what I was going to comment on, Matthew.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to comment on. The fact that the early practitioners, the Gnostics as they were known, often get a bad reputation, you know, and sometimes because some of their practices were a little bit outlandish and everything like that. But you know, baby and bathwater type stuff. There are a lot of people that I know that just throw out everything to do with, you know, Gnostics and Gnosticism, if you like, as being, oh no, you know, they're totally anti-Christian, bad people, blah, blah, blah.
Well, there's a lot of, you got to admit that there's a hell of a lot of really evil, fucked up, satanic Gnostics that have been there, messed up things. Which obviously doesn't help.
But that doesn't mean you. Well, it doesn't mean. I mean, you know, when Quan's talking about it, for example, it's a completely different meaning, if you like. You know, let's forget that history.
And here is probably the most encouraging reality for us to go on our epistemological journey, because only when we are advanced in our epistemological journey that we are not mesmerized by those people trying to mesmerize us precisely.
Sure. Right on.
You hit actually, in my view, a very important nail on the head, Matthew, when you said something about unknowable knowledge that is only available to the initiated. And I'm just going to throw one more idea, that I think that the notion of chosen people or the elect, which are expressions which come in the Bible, I don't believe they have to do with an entire community or religion, but it has to do with individual souls who get that initiation, who have access to knowledge that would be otherwise unknowable. again, I'm just going to leave an idea with you because we don't have time to.
No, I
discuss.
hear you. No, and I think that I think I agree with you. And you know, the way that Plato describes in the Republic the divided line of the soul that moves from the realm of illusion, the belief in sense perception, to the slightly higher domain of souls that learn how to use logic, but are still limited by their logic from accessing the higher domain of creative play and reason, which is a yet higher transformation of discovery that has to occur, and onward, upward, right? And Quan Plato, sometimes I throw them together, but Quan has his own formulation of that he's gone over regarding the sixfold pathway. You see it in Confucianism in its own way. You see it in Hinduism in its own expression. But there's this idea that, yeah, you do need to, in a sense, have a form of initiation and that's what every universal education system should be, is to give kids a proper organic pathway to discover the fallacies of the senses and how to use their senses as instruments for the service of the higher soul that yearns for something higher and awakening that flame, right? And if you got a proper education system, it'll do that through play, through arts, through music, through a healthy approach to science and unifying them all together. It'll come up very naturally in service of humanity. It'll work out that way. But oftentimes it doesn't, because we have these oligarchs.
Maybe the creator has you know, you in the last session you mentioned very quickly a phrase, many be called but few are chosen. You just passed by it, right? So that it could be that that's a reference to the idea that the God or the Supreme Spirit, whatever, himself chooses, or itself chooses who has access to that esoteric knowledge, and it's not generally available to everybody. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what I read.
I would like to offer maybe a middle solution.
Go on.
It is not certainly something easy, that's for sure, because you need to be truly motivated. But I would like to repeat one of my favorite expression. It's still an open oligarchy. Okay, it's an oligarchy. It means that few are elected. It's quite true, but it's open. It means that it's not closed to anyone if that person is willing to make a true effort. And my hypothesis that with the advancement of history, meaning the goal of universal history, is that open oligarchy would be a true open democracy. Okay, democracy is not a word that I like very much because that word is a caricature right now. But from an open oligarchy, with time, it can be a true open republic. Okay, let's use the word republic rather than democracy, meaning that that kind of supposedly difficult knowledge would be in the normal education of everyone. Because once again, education is educare, to bring forth what is from within, beauty, goodness, and truth, so the master can use the body and not the reverse. But for that, maybe we have to go through the phase of open oligarchy. So the key words is open, but with time, it can become something open really to everyone and not only to an oligarchy, even if it's open.
Well, you use the word educare. Now, can you define religion, religare?
Well, it's to bind together. But I would say that to bind together, most of the time is understood as to bind a society, the people of a society together. But I would like to offer my definition of religare, to bind together. It means that is to integrate together the 6 layers of the mind, having the pure awareness at the top, guiding the intellect and the sense of perception, meaning that the soul is the master or the charioteer, if you want, the famous metaphor used by Plato in the Republic. The charioteer is present and is guiding the chariot and the horses, and not the reverse, having mad horses driving by themselves the chariot with the charioteer inside, which is an abnormal situation. The normal situation is that the charioteer, the soul, is awakened and is driving the chariots and is driving the horses.
Well, what I had learned was that religare means bind back to the source. In other words, the soul liberates itself and goes back the way Socrates is saying he wants to go back to his kind rather than stay here and be in mastery of his senses. He wants to be done. He wants, the philosopher is always seeking death. That's what he says, right?
Yes.
He wants to be free of the horses. He wants to be free of the chariot. He wants his non-corporeal existence.
That's very interesting.
And everybody doesn't have to want that, but that's the ideal he certainly is saying.
But I would say that Buddhism introduced precisely a very refined distinction. Buddhism would distinguish the unenlightened man who would want to live completely, and the enlightenment man who wants to stay, to give a helping hand. Okay, that is precisely the concept of the Bodhisattva. And I would say that it's good that there is the possibility of the two kinds of enlightened being.
Well, while Socrates was alive, his purpose was to teach others to learn how to recognize what was already there in their minds in the first place. I think the word was to recognize what was there. That's kind of what he taught, I believe.
Yes, you're right, Kelly. To recognize, to remember
that something was always there in the first place.
Well, it's the main message of the philosophers. Remember that the soul is the master. Or maybe it's a direct message to the soul. Remember yourself.
Know thyself.
Like
that's what Gnosis is also defined as, right? Know thy highest self, not your body, but the deepest, highest self.
Exactly. And it's the notion of being born twice in India. When you are born the second time, it's because you are born by awareness.
Well, it's the same idea that even Jesus uses, except you be born again.
Exactly.
I think this is going to be...
Exact. No,
this is heavy.
No, I'm delighted by that, because you see that philosophy is truly one. If there's something that is truly one on this earth, it's philosophy.
And unfortunately, Harinder, there's another one, the whole concept in Christianity these days, evangelical Christianity, particularly, of being born again.
Yes, is, and it's used to say, I'm going to heaven because I'm a born again Christian. You're going to hell because you may be a Christian, but you're not born again. And the Catholics are going to hell because they believe in Mary. So all those kinds of things are there.
Oh, yeah.
They're in all the religions, by the way.
Which is why it's good to be in an environment like we're in right this very moment, and we can talk about these things quite freely, because you cannot talk to those people.
You cannot, no.
You cannot. You couldn't get them to understand your concept, for example, of, being born again in a Christian sense, as you just mentioned it. You would be laughed out of the room. And in fact, you probably wouldn't be laughed out of the room. You'd be thrown out of the room bodily.
Even though in that particular instance, somebody actually asks Jesus and says, does that mean I have to go back into my mother's womb? And he explains it. In spite of that actual explanation, you have this very superficial seizing of the label born again Christian.
Instead of the mother's womb, we're back in the cave trying to teach the others. To find the light.
Yeah. But those born again understand born again at Logos 2 and not at Logos 5 or 6. That's the problem.
I don't think they get anywhere near Logos, but that's just me.
Just a way to talk among us.
Yeah.
Where will I find more information about these 6 Logoses, Kwan?
You can read the Republic, especially the chapter 7.
Okay, it's in the Republic. All right.
Or you can read the chapter 10 of the Laws, or you can read the Theaetetus, because even if the Theaetetus were talking more of logos 1, 2, 3, 4, but between the lines you have logos 5 and 6.
Thank you.
Guys, it's
Long session.
I hate to end such a sublime discussion on the nature of the divine and ideas and the eternal, but it's bedtime.
It's bedtime,
But
absolutely.
let's
For you,
what's
for
that?
you- For you, it might be, mate, but it's middle of the day here. I'm going to go down to the
You're
studio and
starting
play on
your
the
day,
drums for a
okay.
few hours.
Have a coffee for me. All right. So you guys I guess on Sunday, Cynthia is going to do something on Yuval Harari's what's it called? It's why H.G. Wells's World Brain and Yuval Harari's Hackable Humans Will Fail, Sunday at 2 p.m. And I'll send out the invite tomorrow or so. So feel free to share that with your friends and colleagues. And we'll pick this up for reading number 3 next Wednesday. So till then, bye everybody.
Thank you all. Have a great
Yeah,
night.
thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.